Hey, I'm Kayla. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Frankenstein. Let's go. When you think of Frankenstein, you immediately think of this guy, the big monster that has been a well-known household name for decades. He is a creation, an abomination, and you probably think of villagers running around with pitchforks and torches. Well, this guy isn't even Frankenstein at all. He is technically Frankenstein's monster. And this guy, who is the real monster, is Victor Frankenstein. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe if you want more book videos. The book Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley, and it was published in 1818. She had started writing it in 1816 when she and her husband Percy Shelley and a friend, Lord Byron, had a competition to see who could write the best horror story. Mary had won with her story of Frankenstein. The story opens up with a collection of letters from a man, Captain Robert Walton, to his sister Margaret. He's on a sea voyage and he writes about how he comes across a man on a sled in the snow and he's brought on board to recover. And this man, he's kind of seen as a bit manic and they can't figure out what's wrong with him. And then he starts to tell the captain a tale. This is where the story shifts to Victor Frankenstein's narrative. He tells of his childhood, his siblings, his parents, and his cousin Elizabeth who comes to live with them after her parents die. We aren't outright told that the narrator is Victor, but it's easy to understand that this is implied. Victor comes of age where he leaves his home in Switzerland and he goes off to college in Germany. There we see him interacting with professors and he has a deep interest in science. We learn that he's been in secret working on the creation of an experiment in his apartment. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation in life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. And when the story moved into the section where he brings his creation to life, I was really surprised how completely underwhelming these passages were. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years, for the sole purpose of infusing life into this inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Once we have the passage of the creature waking up, Victor is horrified with what he has done. But then he immediately leaves the creature. Then later when Victor is sleeping, he wakes up to the creature lurking over him. And then Victor just runs away. So Victor's on the streets after again leaving this creation when he runs into Henry, who's a childhood friend, and then Victor brings him back to his apartment. And then once they get to the outside of the apartment, Victor has this inner dialogue where he's worrying about his friend seeing his creation. The thought made me shiver that the creature whom I had left in the apartment might still be there, alive and walking about. So then we get back to the apartment and they go inside and the creature is gone. And we seem to forget that the whole creation of this creature even happened and that this being is just out there in the world. So months pass by and Victor has some letter correspondence back and forth with his family, and he also falls ill for a time. He then recovers from his illness, but then he gets a letter informing him that his younger brother William has been murdered. So Victor travels back home for the first time in 7 years to be with his family during this time. While back at home, he's walking around in the area around the scene of where William was murdered, and he thinks that he sees the creature in the trees, and then he becomes convinced that the creature is responsible for this murder. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongings to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night at which he had first received life. And this was his first crime. Alas, I had turned loose into the world a depraved wretch, whose delight in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? Unfortunately, William's nanny, Justine, is thought to be the murderer, and she is sentenced to death, even though none of them really believe she is responsible. Because of this, Victor is overcome with guilt and sorrow for what has happened, and he goes into a massive depressed state. But I had a hard time sympathizing for him, and I'm unsure if the author intended for us to feel sorry for Victor, as in my opinion, he was entirely to blame and I did not feel like he deserved my sympathy. We move to passages where Victor and his family take a trip to try and improve all of their moods, to move on from this family tragedy of William's murder and Justine being tried for his murder. And while on vacation, Victor takes it upon himself to spend time alone on the lake to reflect. And then one night he comes across the creature that he had created. And I did find it strange that he kept running into him, but this is explained later by the creature. The creature knows Victor is his creator, and they have a moment of confrontation. During this confrontation, Victor is frightened of the creature, but the creature wants to discuss what has happened to him since his creation. During this section, I found it very interesting that the creature had such a vivid vocabulary for being a creature that was made in a lab and left to his own devices. At first I thought it was strange, but then the character has his own dialogue for several chapters, and we get to learn how he has been surviving on his own and where he learned all of the things he now knows. The biggest pivotal moment the creature had when he was learning how to care for himself was when he came across a poor village family of a blind father and his son and his daughter. The creature describes his time of watching them work and live and interact with one another. Through watching this family, the creature learned of music and language and food and sacrifice and love. He had grown to understand that they were a poor family who really only had each other to rely on, and he would work at night to do things for the family, like gathering firewood so that they wouldn't need to do this themselves the next day. He was doing all of this in secret because he had prior bad experiences with villagers who had treated him poorly because he was a monster. He had dialogue where he spoke of how he wanted to interact with this family he had grown to know, but he wanted to wait until he was able to communicate with them, as he didn't want them to treat him the same way that these other villagers had. And honestly, these passages kind of broke my heart. Like, he just talked about how much he wanted to feel included and he wanted to feel loved so much, but he was so terrified of their reactions of him. Although I eagerly longed to discover myself to the cottagers, I ought not to make the attempt until I had first become master of their language, which knowledge might enable me to make them overlook the deformity of my figure. We get to a point where the family leaves the blind father at home alone. So the creature goes into the house and he speaks with him and they have a conversation, and he hopes by the father not seeing him because he's blind, he'll be able to gain his trust. But then his remaining family returns and they are just utterly horrified. The next day we learn the family has left the cottage essentially out of fear. And so the creature then decides that it's time to leave and he wants to go find his creator. He knows from the papers that he had taken from Victor's lab that Victor was from Geneva, so he decides to go there. So after weeks of traveling, he gets to Geneva, and this is where we kind of circle back around to William, remember the brother who was murdered. So the creature sees William just kind of out and about, and at this point he does not know the relation between William and Victor, and he tries to grab him to be his friend. He figured since William was young, he may not have any of this prejudice towards him that these other villagers already had. But William sees him and he's afraid, and so he yells for him to let go. And in doing so, he mentions that his father has the last name of Frankenstein. So upon hearing this, the creature grabs his throat to quiet him and he kills him. After this, he sees a photo of the Frankenstein's mother that William had with him, and he decides that he wants a lady friend. So then at this point in the story, he, in his narrative to Victor, he tells him that he wants him to create him a companion. We may not part until you have promised to comply with my requisition. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. So then we see the dialogue switch back to Victor's point of view. And Victor really does not want to create this companion. But he eventually does agree to create the companion because the creature says that they will go to South America together, and then Victor will never be bothered by them again if he's granted this companion. I consent to your demand on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighborhood of man, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile. After this conversation, after Victor agrees, the creature leaves him, and then Victor and his father have a conversation about Victor marrying Elizabeth. Yes, the cousin. And it's agreed that he will marry her after a 2-year European expedition that he has planned with his friend Henry. And it's on this trip that Victor decides that he's going to create this creature's companion. So partway through the trip, when Victor and Henry are together, Victor tells Henry that he's going to go off on his own for a little bit. And then this is when we see him creating the companion. But partway through the creation, Victor changes his mind and he destroys what he had started creating. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge withdrew. After this, the creature and Victor have a confrontation, and the creature tells Victor that he will pay for this on his wedding night. Then the next day, Victor receives a letter from Henry asking him to join him again on their trip. But before Victor can do this, he has to dispose of the experiment, so he does so in the sea. And he's in a boat, and then some time passes, he falls asleep in the boat, and by the time he steers toward the shore, he's unsure of where he is. It's gotten kind of turned around. But then when he goes to the land, he learns from the people that there has been a murder. And they're being really strange towards him, and he's taken to go see the body because they want to see his reaction, because they think he's guilty. Because the person who they saw do it had retreated into the sea. And of course, the man that was killed, we learned, was Victor's friend, Henry. Victor is in prison for 3 months while awaiting trial, and then he is released as it was able to be proven that he was elsewhere when the body of Henry was found. At this point in the story, we have seen Victor basically going mad from guilt and remorse from what he has done by the creation of his experiments, and he is constantly visibly agitated and he's freaking out. And I think this following passage is a really great way of summing this up. As I quitted the prison, I heard one of the men say, "He may be innocent of the murder, but he certainly has a bad conscience." These words struck me. A bad conscience? Yes, surely I had one. William, Justine, and Clerval had died through my infernal machinations. Victor returns to Switzerland and he and Elizabeth marry. True to the creature's words, he murders Elizabeth on their wedding night. Shortly after this, Victor's father dies of old age and at the shock of learning that Elizabeth is dead. At this point, Victor changes from being very fearful of the creature to only wanting revenge for all he has done to his family. For months, we see Victor trying to track him down, but he keeps escaping his grasp. And the creature keeps leaving him clues and keeps helping him to be on the right path of finding him, just to escape his grasp every time, and he's basically taunting him. He leaves a passage for him, letting him know to keep following, and soon they will end this. My reign is not yet over. You live, and my power is complete. Follow me. I seek the everlasting ice of the north, where you will feel the misery of cold and frost, to which I am impassive. Come on, my enemy. We have yet to wrestle for our lives, but many hard and miserable hours must you endure until that period shall arrive. This chase continues, and near the end of the story, Victor is on a dog sled, and he becomes within a mile of reaching the creature, but then he fails and he cannot continue. In a few minutes, a tumultuous sea rolled between me and my enemy, and I was left drifting on a scattered piece of ice that was continually lessening and thus preparing me for a hideous death. So at this point in the story, this is where Victor's telling of the story combines with him being picked up with Captain Walton, as we mentioned at the beginning of the book, with his letters. And this whole tale of the book was what Victor had retold to the captain, and he talks to the captain and he asks him to continue with his vengeance on the creature when he is no longer able to. Victor travels with the ship, but eventually he does succumb to his illness and he passes away. The captain then retells in a letter to his sister that he finds the creature in the cabin room with Victor's body, and the creature is mourning Victor's death. He is very deeply affected by Victor's death, and in turn he feels remorse for the things that he has done. Prior to Victor's death, he had asked the captain to finish disposing of the creature when he was able to find him, And when the creature is talking to the captain is conflicted on this, and he can't decide if he wants to kill the creature, but before he is able to, the creature indicates that he will dispose of himself so that he will no longer cause any harm to others. But soon, he cried with sad and solemn enthusiasm, "I shall die, and what I now feel will no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away, and my ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell." He sprung from the cabin window as he said this upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in the darkness and distance. So that's the whole original story. Over the decades, the story of the experiment Victor Frankenstein created has been retold time and time again, with each rendition being a little different. The book is really a question of morals, and it has you questioning who is to blame for the horrendous acts the creature has done. Is it the scientist who made him in the first place, or the experiment who in the beginning really only wanted love? And would we even be questioning this if Victor would have been there for the creature to begin with? Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Bye!